Welcome to Pera's Playbook. This is your host, Alex Pera. Let's open up our playbook and see who our guest is. Please enjoy. Welcome to episode 197. Today we're joined by David Newman. He's a composer, conductor. He's done movies like The Mighty Ducks, Sandlot, Tommy Boy, Jingle All The Way, Ice Age, many more. And he's conducted the Royal Philharmonic, Los Angeles Philharmonic, Chicago Symphony, New York, and many, many others. And we're happy to have David join us here on the podcast. How are you this morning?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you hopping on. I've always been a big fan of classical music and movie scores. When I was in college, I took like a history of classical music and music appreciation classes as kind of, electives to fill in the schedule. And yeah, I've always been interested in that. So happy to chat with you about, just music and a little bit of your career and stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, you come from a very musical family. Your father, Alfred Newman, won 9 Oscars. Your brothers, uncles, your cousins, Randy Newman. So
Yeah.
you were kind of born into it. Was music something you just always, right from the start did? Was there ever a thought of doing anything else, or was it always just music?
Oh no, we grew up in the west side of Los Angeles, which is where a lot of Hollywood people lived. And I grew up in the 60s. My childhood was basically in the 60s. I was born in 54, so I'm 71 years old. No, it was pretty it as we would say in LA, it was pretty chill in LA in Los Angeles at that time. So we did a lot of sports, we did a lot of theater, but yeah, music was a part, but it wasn't. We were trained, but it wasn't like we were the only kids that were trained in music. I would say my dad was pretty old by the time my mother was his third wife. So Thomas and me are like 18 months apart. I had an older brother that was 18 months older, and then there was a much younger sister and a much older sister. So um, I would say it was a pretty normal upbringing given what one might think of the accomplishments of my father. Um, he had worked at 20th Century Fox for 20 years, from 1939 to 1959, and had, his office was there, and he would go to work every day there. But by the time we were sort of cognizant, he was working at home, though he still sort of kept. He always kept New York theater hours. I don't know if you know anybody that at least in New York, this thing, you go to the theater at 6 p.m. You get a show up and running, you conduct the show, which what my father did all through the 1920s, and you stay up till 4 in the morning and sleep till 11. You get into this rhythm. So he was kind of not really that much a part of our lives. My mother was much younger. She was she was a Goldwyn girl. Each studio had a sort of bevy of Folly, Ziegfeld Folly girls, Goldwyn girls, and MGM had, um, but she was they were 20 years apart, but they really made it kind of work. She kind of did most of the work. And she made sure we were trained, but it wasn't like, you have to do music. It was like part of there was no quitting. We all learned violin at about 7, and then piano at about 10. And then at about 12 years old, we went through what would now be college harmony, form and analysis, and functional harmony. And so Tom and I and my younger sister Maria sort of gravitated toward eventually. And my older brother and an older sister did not, but it wasn't. It was pretty kind of normal. It's just now that I've done this so much, and especially the last 15 years for me conducting these really great orchestras, I've gotten much more of a sense of what he accomplished and how much sacrifice it took, and kind of how lucky he was to have met my mother that sort of just took care of it without babying us. It wasn't like, but I don't know, that's a long-winded way of saying sort of how we grew up. There really wasn't a lot of pressure to do anything, but we all wanted to do stuff. It wasn't Nobody was browbeating us to do it. It was in Regent, it was kind of perfect in a way. Los Angeles was a lovely city in the 60s and 70s. I mean, you had to have a car. There were certain things that you had to do that you didn't have to do in most cities. But in terms of the public school system and the music that was going on and theater and it was great. We loved it. I don't know that it's like that now, but it certainly was then.
Yeah. And you ended up sticking around California, going to
Yeah,
USC. And when you were there, you ended up playing, around Hollywood on different
yeah,
films as a musician.
yeah. But I wasn't interested in film music at all, except that I love movies. All of us loved movies. It was what you did on a weekend night. When you got older, you take a date and go, and um, there was a certain place that you would go in LA that had these beautiful first run theaters. Obviously, LA Hollywood, that's the place where it happened. But I was really into classical music. I got really into the violin, but what I really wanted to do was be a conductor. But I went to school as a violin performance major. I got a master's degree. It's a couple of years after the 4 years in conducting. But through my 20s, I worked as a freelance musician in Hollywood. So I played on hundreds of films and television. John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith and Henry Mancini and Dave Grusin and people that were working in from about 1977. I worked from about 1970, end of 76 to about 1982, 83. So what's that, about 8 years, and then eventually I stopped and I sort of gave up on the conducting, and I started trying to claw my way into scoring movies, which took me 3 or 4 years to make any inroad at all. But I was a huge classical music. Um, my mom would take us when we were 12 and 13 years old, almost every night. Um, we would come home and do our homework, which, it wasn't like my kids' homework, which took 5 hours. It was a normal amount of homework. And then we would go to these, what were called community orchestras around Los Angeles. And community orchestras there would be a lot of adults in it that were kind of amateurs, but good amateurs, then some that weren't very good amateurs, and then some kids like us that would fill out the string section. Because in an orchestra that, there's generally between 28 and 32 violins. So you can kind of, bake your way through. And then eventually with the concert, they had these grants where they would get money from the musicians union to hire 15, 20 professionals to kind of fill out the orchestra, and then they would do a concert. So the concerts were pretty good. I mean, it was, you could hear some were better than others. But my God, by the time Tom and I were 18 or 19 years old, we got through everything, all the Beethoven symphonies, all the Tchaikovsky symphonies, even some of the Mahler symphonies, which weren't as popular then. All the Stravinsky ballets, the Debussy La Mer nocturnes, and I would say like 80% of the canon we had kind of slogged through at some point or another before we even got to college. And it wasn't like all that high pressure. You would just go every night, basically 4 nights a week, maybe. And then on Saturday to an orchestra and just sit there. And as we got better, it was more enjoyable. But my mom didn't give a crap if we liked it or not. We were going. And that is the best way to learn music. Just sit in an orchestra for hours, weeks, months, years. You will learn what that is, what concert music means, what it's for, how it's structured, the way they were, you rehearse the winds by themselves and you hear what they're, you just sort of sop this all up. You don't even you're not even thinking about it. It's kind of like it must be like when you learn a language as a kid. You just learn it. You don't even think about it. You can think about other stuff. There's good, goodies, foods that, with donuts and coffee or whatever. And you get to talk to grown up. It was great. It was just but I don't ever remember not being able to read music ever. I bet I learned to read music by the time I was 10 years old. I had to learn to read bass clef and when I learned piano. But by playing in orchestra, you basically learned all the rhythm patterns, which is what's the hardest thing to do to be really a great sight reader. And of course, if you're working in a Hollywood studio, you have to be an expert sight reader. You get one time through, maybe to make a mistake or two, and that's it. No more mistakes. If you do, it's a big deal. So you kind of learn. Anyway, that's sort of my background. And then in my late 20s, after studying conducting privately and at school, I just decided I'm never going to be a conductor. So I worked my way up to film scoring, and little by little made my way. And now, since about 2007, when I started doing the movie nights at the Hollywood Bowl, I've been conducting more and more and more, and it's amazing. It's amazing what I learned. I didn't even know what I learned in my 20s, but I did. I learned a lot. Conducting is a bizarre endeavor. It just is. I thought about I had a private teacher that I studied with 9 hours a week for about 10 years, who had studied with this guy named Leon Barzan, who used to conduct the New York City Ballet, who had been Stravinsky's principal violist. So there was a certain technique that I was interested in. I was interested in being able to have the orchestra play on the beat instead of behind the beat. More like Tuscany, more Italianate, because it was much better for theater and scoring films, because scoring films, you have to follow the synchronizing. But eventually I just, when I was about 28, 29, I said, screw it. I got married, and then I matriculated into scoring movies.
So what's the process when you're going to do a film, for scoring a film? I mean, do they have the film already filmed and you have to like watch it and, like,
Yeah.
because usually the music obviously follows what's going on if it's an action scene, if there's drama. So do they have the movie all filmed and then they send it over to you and then you've got to,
Yeah, but filmmaking is intrinsically chaotic. And when I mean chaotic, I mean it is utter chaos most of the time. So, yeah, okay, they finish filming, they start editing. At some point, they'll bring you in to look at a cut, and you'll do what's called spotting. So spotting is a lot of terms in film, in music, and in film, and all of them are kind of like old terms. Spotting would be the what's the not the metaphor? Well, maybe the metaphor is you take the entire film and roll it all out, right? Like in one long, horizontal line, and you go, I'm going to start music here, finish music here. I'm going to put music here, finish music here. And then you go through the whole film with the director. That's what's called spotting. You decide where to put music. You kind of talk about what the music should be. Most of the time, they put in music already, so you get an idea. It's very hard to talk about music, even for musicians. So you're kind of prodding around in the dark, trying to figure each other out. You probably haven't spent all that much time with the director, except for the directors that you work with over and over again. And then you just start working. They keep cutting the film, and you're working. So you have to what's called conform it, or you wait till they're done. Eventually, they're either done cutting the film or they've run out of time. And eventually, you record the music, however you're going to do it. And they might still not be finished cutting the picture. So then they might have to conform it later in dubbing. But ideally, it would be done. It would be what we call locked. And you'd write the music and you'd go through the process of recording it, the director, vetting the music, all that stuff. So yeah, that's. But it's done. You sometimes you have a week to do it. Sometimes you have 3 months. It's completely, and sometimes you think you have 3 weeks, and then you have 3 months because they take the movie and test it and say, we need to shoot a different ending, and then they go, you have to be really, you have to be really flexible about it. You just, it's part of the. If you like the adrenaline rush of not of the freelance world and not knowing what's going to happen, it's definitely not boring. So if you like that kind of thing and can handle it, and you can handle somebody not liking what you wrote,
Yeah.
you have to write something that you believe in, right? So if somebody says they don't like it, you're gonna be upset. You're gonna have an emotional response. If you don't have an emotional response, it means you don't give a crap, right?
Yeah.
That's not the way it works, right? But then you have to know that this is going to be the process. I'm going to feel pissed, angry, you know, all those emotions, and then rebuild yourself and write something else, and you just keep going through. And what you learn too is when you rewrite stuff, the director thinks that's magic. To hear something that they didn't like for a scene and then to hear something that they love for a scene is almost better than initially hearing something that they love for the scene, if you know what I mean. Because
Yeah.
it means to them that you can solve problems. And most of filming is all about solving problems. You know, a guy writes the script, right? Your first problem is where are you going to shoot it? Location scouting. Another problem is who's going to be in it? Who are you going to cast? That changes everything. That's a problem. How do you solve that problem? Then you shoot the movie and you have actors acting the movie. They might not do what you want. It might not turning out the way you want. How do you solve the problem? On and on and on. And the director is like just a big, you know, captain of the ship and is making millions of decisions. And there are all these people working for him that are just friggin' geniuses. All of them, the DPs, everybody that works in film, my experience, the above line and below line people working on film are there because they love it. They respect the history. They respect the craft. They can see details that are just extraordinary that make the experience great. But the director has to deal with all this, and all of them. The DP has all this history of the history of the director of photography, how things were shot, and what favorite movies, and how they like things lit, and the props person and the costume person, and you can go on and on. It's what makes it so chaotic and so difficult, but it's also what is so wonderful about it because it is truly collaborative.
Yeah.
And in a way it's collaborative. It ends up being collaborative with a medium that is not doesn't collaborate with you. A film is a film. It's not going to adjust to you. You have to adjust to it. So a great score is all about following what the film needs, what it's asking for. If you anthropomorphize it, in a way, because the more it gets cut, the closer you are to the end, the more it is what it is, or for better, for worse. And you have to give it what it needs. If it needs music, you put music in. If it doesn't, you don't. And you try to find that. And most of the time, it doesn't work out all that great. But when it does, it's like friggin' magic. Movies.
Yeah.
We all love movies. That's why we're talking about it. So.
Oh, yeah. But I feel like a lot of people too, they don't understand the chaos, right? They don't understand what it takes to make a movie. They sit in a theater, they watch it. Wow, that was great, and they go home, but they have no idea. They have no concept of what happened to put that on the film, from the music to the director to the actors to the editing to all of this stuff, what it takes to actually put a film together.
Mhm.
Everything
I
that
mean,
you talked about.
imagine an actor does a take as a character, and then the director says cut, and now the actor is himself or herself again, and they might be completely different than the character.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and so it is. Well, I think what's so great about movies, why we love it so much, is because in the most realistic way. that we have discovered up to now. You can go places, see people, things that you would never be able to do in your life, and um, you develop empathy for the characters when it's well done, or at least you understand why that character is doing what that character is doing, even if it's immoral or evil or whatever. Um, it's a way of getting in another person's moccasins. Look, to quote, To Kill a Mockingbird, one of the greatest movies ever made. Great Elmer Bernstein score too, like fabulous at a weird place in film music. That's another conversation. Um, it it helps us understand our fellow human beings. I think I used to think it was just kind of not that there wasn't much point in watching. They used to call television the boob tube. When I was growing up, it's like you watch television, you're just an idiot if you watch television all day. So it had a sort of pejorative connotation. But I really think that movies and art in general, but movies that are so accessible to so many people are much more important than I thought they were when I was younger. I think it's a really important, powerful art form that everyone that's in it takes it really seriously. That obviously we that do the music take it super seriously. There's a lot going on in film music that's not it's not easy to spot because it has to be simple on the surface. It can't just detract from the story what's going on, but underneath what's the surface and the texture or the prettiness of the tune or whatever, there's always a great John Williams or Goldsmith or Bernard Herrmann or Alfred Newman or there's other stuff going on that is helping tell the story, like the vertical story. The story goes horizontally along serially, but there's a reaction, a human reaction that goes along with the story that's submerged, that's underneath. And I think a lot of times music can help give you a little window into what that is, which I
Oh
think
yeah.
is most powerful. Is the most powerful aspect. Not every movie, obviously. It but in like say a movie like To Kill a Mockingbird, which has this beautiful, simple little theme. The opening title, the little kids are laughing and they're playing with toys. And you don't know till the end that Boo Radley, the character they're so scared of, is the one that put those toys for them. That he's a really benevolent character and saves their lives. And underneath this little simple theme is this tragedy of this Boo Radley character. I mean, my opinion. I mean, you can look at it in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But that's a great score that it seems so simple on the surface, yet is so profoundly involved in the goodness of the main character. I'm blanking on his name, but Atticus Finch.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Atticus.
Gregory Peck character.
Yeah.
He's like an archetype. He's the type of person that does all the unpleasant things that nobody wants to do. He's going to represent Tom Bradley, Tom Robinson, excuse me, Tom Robinson. Um, and so it's a little bit fable-ish. It's a little bit of a morality tale, but yet these people are real people in the South during the Depression. And so the music doesn't seem to depict that. It's just a pretty simple little kid's story. But underneath all that is this sadness and elegance that's blah, blah, blah. So again, another conversation probably.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think if you have a wonderful film with a great film score, I mean, it helps invoke more emotion. I think, you could be sitting there on your couch with your headphones on, just listening to the film score. And if it's a really good film score, it'll take you back to
Mm.
the movie. You're not even
Yeah.
watching it. You can just run the movie through
Yeah.
in your head because it lines up with the music so well.
Yeah.
I
And
love film scores.
most of it is concert music too. It's played by an orchestra, the same
Yeah.
size orchestra that plays Mahler and Beethoven and Bruckner, and here's another example. Like I do film with live orchestra a lot, where we project the film and the music's muted and we play the music live. So I've done a lot of Back to the Future, the
Yeah.
1985, which is one of my favorite movies, and I think is one of the great scores of the 20th
Oh yeah.
century.
Alan
That scene,
Silvestri is
yeah,
wonderful. Yeah.
that scene at the end when the storm comes and he goes back to the future. First of
Yeah.
all, Back to the Future. What is that? You know,
I
and
know.
the whole score is like tick tock. It's all about getting to that lightning bolt. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
the music is all breathlessly, and clock doesn't do that, but a metronome goes left, backward. You can say backwards, forwards, tick tock, and the music has this quality of racing to the finish, and you're just almost not gonna get there, you know. And then all the stuff that happens with Doc and Marty and you know, him writing the letter and telling him that, you know, all that while this whole scene, you know, I think it's a 12-minute sequence. I think it's one of the great sequences in all of 20th century film music is that clock tower sequence, which I think goes on for about 12 minutes.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's phenomenal. The music from the Back to the Future movies is fantastic. And you've talked about so many phenomenal. You mentioned Elmer Bernstein and you mentioned Jerry Goldsmith and all these different. I love Bill Conti and
Bill
one of
Conti,
my
I worked.
favorite is Ramin Djawadi, who's done all the Game of Thrones
Mhm.
music.
Yeah.
He was my number one listened to artist on Spotify the other year because
Yeah.
I listen to that music so much. But it's all, fantastic. These films, these great films, and they're associated with the great scores that go with them. Star
Mhm.
Wars, obviously, everybody thinks
Yeah.
of the music. They think of John Williams.
Yeah.
E.T., people think of the music that goes
Yeah.
with it. So I think it's a parallel. You have a great film, it's often associated with great music.
I've done all those in concert with live orchestra. And the wonderful thing about it is you get to rehearse it. So you go over and over and over it. And I've done ET maybe 15 times, you know, and it's just extraordinary. I mean,
Yeah,
the detail, I mean, it's the beautiful soaring themes and all that, you know, but the other stuff, the detail in ET, like the whole idea that you never see the adults, it's all from the kids' point of view. And at the beginning, are the adults, are they menacing? Are they what are they doing? What's all these cars coming up and all this talking and you know, and then it turns out that they're just as much kids as the kids. But the way John Williams sets that up right at the beginning, right when they come in and after ET is you know when he's foraging or they're what are they botanists or something, and the car comes up and John immediately makes a little John Williams, sorry, oh, John, I shouldn't say that. That's probably anyway. He makes a little motive that is menacing, but it's kind of childlike in a way. It's not dark. It's rhythmic. It's a little bit of a dancey theme. It has a triplet aspect to it, and he uses it all the way through the movie until you discover when he's got that scene and he says, you know, since I was 12-year-old child, I wanted to, you know, when the guy, what's the actor's name? Anyway, he says to Elliot, you know, I'm a child. I wish you did. He did the best thing. He found the best person he could find to take care of him, to get him home. But a lot of that is all set up right at the beginning that
yeah,
John Williams does. You know, that's the fun of film music when you can get stuff like that in without you know, making it too much about the music, you know?
yeah. No, I completely agree. It's really wonderful, and I'm sure we could talk about it for hours on end. But and maybe we'll have to do another podcast someday down the road. But I appreciate
Sure.
you coming and taking
Absolutely.
some time out of your morning.
Certainly.
Thanks for listening. Please stay tuned for more episodes soon.